All right. Well, I'm pretty drunk currently, and so I'm going to continue drinking while talking about a philosopher who hated drink but loved Dionysus, the god of wine. One of the most misunderstood philosophers, perhaps, and also one of the ones I'm most familiar with, and that is Friedrich Nietzsche. So let's get into it. So I think one of the things that people misunderstand so much about Friedrich Nietzsche, and it's one of the two or three things I think um, that get people on the wrong track about him is the style, the way that he writes. He writes in with a kind of um, well, pretentiously. He writes with a, and I think it's a technical term. It's a pretense. The way that he is writing is an affected style. And for anyone who has not read Nietzsche, this is a man who writes sentences like, you know, we Hyperboreans seek the true, like he speaks with a lot of elevated royal wheeze and um, a very romantic tone that turns a lot of people off, makes him sound um, arrogant. And that's the disconnect. His pretense, people read as arrogance. When, if you understand Nietzsche's philosophy, you couldn't imagine a less arrogant guy. So I think all of Nietzsche's philosophy can be boiled down to his introduction to the gay science, or the joyful wisdom, if you prefer that translation, where he begins by saying, "But Herr Nietzsche has become healthy. Why should anyone care about Nietzsche becoming healthy?" Well, it is because um, philosophy and the way that people philosophize is essentially a byproduct of one's state of health. So Nietzsche theorized, asserted. And I mean, it's not original to Nietzsche to say that, oh, yeah, how you're feeling dictates how you think. We're all familiar with waking up with too little sleep and too much stress and looking at the mirror and thinking, God, I look awful. I could just blow my brains out. And you wake up, 3 days later after some good sleep and good food, and you look at exactly the same person in the mirror and you think, man, I look awesome. It's all about how you feel. But what's original to Nietzsche, I think, is the depth that he went with this um, observation. He would talk about entire civilizations in this frame. He talked about in one case that sticks out in my memory. He dismissed Buddhism as a philosophy of people who consume too much rice. Yeah. you know, so diet was a very important thing to him, and was his big problem with Germans, his own native people, was their alcohol consumption. He thought that led to a depressive philosophy, collectively speaking. And so, um, it's not entirely, self-contradictory to be a fan of Dionysus, the god of madness and wine and inspiration of that kind, as well as drama and the fertility of nature and other things. Um, with Brian Murarescu's research, we have good reason to believe that the wine used in the Eleusinian mysteries and other Dionysian initiation of that time wasn't just alcohol. It might have had some ergot and other additives. But in any case, um, the important thing to understand about Nietzsche relating to this health issue and the philosophizing of health was that Nietzsche was not a healthy person himself. Nietzsche was ill most of his life, suffered from and died of syphilis in his 40s, was unsuccessful in romance and in love, a failure, really, not just unlucky. And um, and I think a key detail is his relationship with his father. His father was a Lutheran minister, and he died when young Friedrich was only 6. We have every reason to believe that Friedrich loved his father very much. And when you read his more Christianity-oriented works, for example, The Antichrist, it's hard not to see a resentment towards the health effects of Christianity, how it elevates what's sickly, what's impoverished, what's suffering. It seems to me that Nietzsche believed that health and happiness, joy with life, are primarily genetic things. Not solely, but primarily genetic things. And that's a pretty profound philosophical statement, because if you believe that, then there's some uncomfortable eugenic implications to that. And Friedrich Nietzsche himself is on the short end of that stick. So the idea that his writing style conveys an arrogance, it assumes that Nietzsche is so unself-critical that he wouldn't be aware of his own shortcomings relating to his own philosophy. The train's sort of a nice vibe. Slightly annoying, but slightly charming too. But anyways, what you see in Nietzsche's philosophy, and what I hope I'm providing here is a way that people can appreciate it and understand it a little bit better, is a sort of individualism that isn't metaphysical in nature. Nietzsche doesn't believe that humans are individuals at the end of the day. That's what his interest in Dionysus demonstrates. But if we act as if we are individuals, if we are pursuing our own missions, our own interests, living as aristocrats in the pastime sense of the term, following our own interests with some authenticity, then those of us who are by health and by happiness maybe not best inclined, maybe not suited to have offspring, will not have offspring. And Nietzsche himself was in that category. But those who are naturally inclined to health and joy in life would, not by intent, but merely as a byproduct of their health and joy, have offspring. And I think the real proof of this is in a parable Nietzsche tells, and I don't remember which book it's in, but he describes just a parable of a father who brings a child to a priest. And the father says, "Priest, tell me, what should I do with this child? He is deformed and he's in pain, he's suffering." And the priest says, "Kill it. Kill it and hold the dead baby to your chest for 3 days, contemplating, internalizing its death, essentially." And this was too harsh for the father, and he walked away thinking the priest had given evil advice because it caused suffering. And the priest, seeing him not take the advice and walk away, said, "But which would cause more suffering, really? Letting the child live or killing it?" And one can't help but get the sense that perhaps Nietzsche was writing that with the feeling that maybe he was that young child who had been permitted to live when he shouldn't have. It's easy for people nowadays who've been initiated into the cult of equality to project and to imagine that other people's experiences of life are comparable to ours. But they really aren't. We do see the world in different ways. We perceive the world in different ways. And some people are naturally, genetically inclined to be happy and to be healthy in a way that other people are not. And Nietzsche believed that religion, that Christianity in particular, inverted the values that by social Darwinism, not natural selection, but by social selection, would incline humanity towards a, a genetic predisposition to enjoy life, and instead to a predisposition for suffering and pain and resentment. By rewarding those things in the social world, and I guess just to re-emphasize the point, Nietzsche himself is in many ways the embodiment of the very thing he is decrying, and there's a profundity and there's a sadness and there's a seriousness to his writing when you understand his personal history. Just as there's a profundity to Ayn Rand's work when you understand her personal history that you wouldn't get necessarily from her writing alone. You know, from a Russian Jew who loved men and loved industry and loved that productivity and the power of men, and who watched communism destroy her father, who she very much loved, and his business in Russia. She saw communism do that. She moves to the United States and sees the seeds of the same ideology beginning to do the same thing to men and to industry in the United States that it had done to her father, who she loved in Russia. It adds something to it. And I think if you understand Nietzsche's own personal history, his own personal health, his own personal struggles, it helps you see the pretense for what it is in his style, which is not a naive arrogance that you expect from like a 20-something-year-old who thinks that they're an Evolean aristocrat of the soul or whatever, but rather a more mature and perhaps doomed but hopeful attempt to transform oneself through the words into something one wasn't. I think that's what Nietzsche was trying to do with his style. He was trying to transform himself through language, sort of bootstrap himself into a place of greater confidence and health and joy in life. And the great thing about Nietzschean individualism is that there is a way that you can enjoy life even if you aren't the sort of person who is best suited to procreate. And that's I'm not saying this because I agree with Nietzsche. I've found myself drifting further and further away from Nietzsche as I've gotten older. But there's a lot of depth and profundity and honesty and insight. And the insight comes from insight into his own thinking, into his own thought processes, and how he himself comes to these sorts of conclusions. And so if you have been wanting to read Nietzsche but struggling, if you have ever wanted to get into him but didn't know how to appreciate his works, I think bearing his own personal history and health and romantic relationships in mind, and evaluating his writing style accordingly can go a long way to helping you appreciate and enjoy what he has to say, because he does have a fascinating and useful perspective on things, garnered from personal experience, a sort of takes one to know one mindset that can help people at the very least know what to avoid, which is especially is resentment. So that's my Nietzsche video. I'm sure there might be more in the future. I'll have to get a lot more drunk to do that.